You provide me with an excellent link to the next presentation from Denmark. I think that's where the meat industry and the meat packing industry were once and now moved over the border to Germany. So I think it's good news for Denmark and for the Danish trade unions to see that there are some enforcement in there. I'd like to ask now to give the floor to Jens Arnholtz. He is an assistant professor at the Department of Sociology at the University of Copenhagen. There's a research center called Employment Relations Research Center there, and you have also specialized in the issues regarding labor migration. I know also you have a special expertise when it comes to posted workers. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you. I don't know if this is on. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor, and I'm really happy to participate in this kind of discussion. I need to make clear to begin with that when we talk about low-wage labor migration in Denmark, it's very much focused on Eastern European workers. That's how the public debate goes. I mean, we could actually, if we dig into the data, see that it might not be only Eastern European workers that are low-wage anymore. But traditionally, there have been not very many migrants in Denmark, and they have been very much included into the system of our labor market system. So the numbers I will present to you are very much on the developments in the numbers of EU citizens from the new member states. And as you can see, I brought different kinds of statistics, because one of the problems we face is that we don't really have really solid, reliable data on what's happening. And they're being developed gradually, so here are some different statistics that we have. But what we can see at least is that there's a common tendency. The numbers are going up, and Poles now is the largest group of foreign workers that we have in the Danish labor market. They surpassed both the Turkish workers and the Germans, who were the largest group before. One thing that is very interesting about the way the numbers develop, in a sense, is how do you explain this kind of development? And you could say that there will be like two explanations. It either push that they're coming because they have low wages, and the data don't really support that, because then you would have far more to begin with. And then you could say it's a pull, and you'd say that it's because companies, they lack workforce. And that definitely was true for Denmark's case up until the middle of 2008. Then we entered the crisis very much indeed. But the development still continued. One case that I like to point out is the construction, where 1/4 of every job were disappeared during the crisis, but still the number of Eastern European workers continued to increase in that sector. So there is some sort of a paradox, and we usually talk about a learning experience among both companies and workers. So the foreign workers learn that, well, you can go to Denmark and they have decent wages, and you can actually earn decent money even though you're not paid as well as Danes. And the companies learn, well, here are a workforce that is willing to work long hours, they're very flexible, they're very keen on getting work, and they're even willing to take lower wages. Also, I should mention that there is, and I think this is a common experience in a number of countries, these workers are always, despite having quite good educational background, always selected into very low-skilled jobs. And that's a debate in and of itself, but it means that some of the low wages they're experiencing is not because they're paid less than comparative Danish workers, but simply because they're selected into low-wage sectors, so to speak. Now, the inflow of these workers have caused a lot of debate in Denmark, and some of you will know that we have a certain company, certain party in Denmark that really like to talk about foreigners. But in fact, there was trade unions that were much alarmed about this issue to begin with, and left-wing parties. And only later on did the far-right Danish Folkeparti enter the debate and become very vocal. So there's been a number of debates about what to do about this. And in Denmark, there's been an option to to stick with the traditional Danish models, which is very similar to the one you have in Sweden, rather than introduce extension mechanisms or introduce minimum wage. It's a continuously a topic in the debate, but it has been rejected so far. Among other things, because trade unions are afraid that making this a legal matter will simply open new ways for circumventions, which you see all over Europe. And I think some of Bettina's examples could be used for the Danish case. If we had more regulation in a legal sense, it would just open new loopholes in a certain sense. But just because there have been no major reforms doesn't mean that there has been no reforms at all. This is sort of a slide of a number of different regulatory issues that have been introduced, and it has really become a very complex regulatory field. So you have EU regulation coming in, trying to solve general EU issues, and not always fitting quite well with the Danish model, but still solving some of the problems. Then you have national regulation going on a broad range of issues like taxational issues, health and safety inspectorate, and also coordination between different authorities. And you have had a huge debate about the resources given to these kind of institutions. For a long time, trade unions said, you don't need to change the rules, just make sure that they're enforced. Because basically the government we had until 2011 really wasn't that keen on putting money aside to this issue. This really changed when the new government, or not so new anymore, came into office. They prioritized the issue of social dumping, as they called it, and has made that really their popular platform, and invested a lot of money on every financial budget since then. And then you have the collective agreements, which are very sector-specific and trying in different sectors, they're introduced different rules and regulations to try and solve these problems. And of course, employers and trade unions have different perspectives of these issues, but still new clauses and new rules have been introduced to try and prevent the worst cases of social dumping. And then you have at the municipality level, you have an increasing use of these labor clauses that stipulate demands on that companies that provide services to the local authorities, that they should stick to collective agreement. You also have demands for chain liability and so on. And I have to say that the issue of, and I think this again to a certain extent is a general thing, is that the issue of low-wage labor is very much a sector-specific issue. So if you, for instance, take the issue of the sector of agriculture, you have a division of labor between Danes working with the very technical machinery, very expensive stuff, and then you have foreign workers really doing the hard, manual, dirty stuff. If you take a sector like cleaning or hotel and restaurant, you have a sort of a supplementation of old migrant workers with these new migrant workers, to some extent also a replacement. If you take manufacturing, well, there's not a huge amount of problems at all, because you have collective agreements that stipulate very clearly that you cannot discriminate. You can't pay lower wages to workers, even if they're posted or temps. They have to have exactly the same. And you have very strong trade unions, you have a very strong system of shop stewards. So it's not really happening there. And then you have construction, which is sort of a classical sector here, because it has a huge potential for wage dumping, or at least wage pressure by foreign workers. And so I'll say a little bit more about construction, because there, of course, is the issue, once again, of posting, which has become very contentious. It's very clear in Denmark that where the problems in construction lie is very much with the posting companies and the posted workers. And just to give a small idea of the problem that are related to this kind of enforcement, I've drawn some data from the Danish RUT register, which is registering foreign service providers. And as you can see, there's less than 5,000 companies in the period from 2012 to the middle of 2014. But they have registered more than 50,000 postings, not persons, but periods of time where they are providing services. And what that means is, if you look at this one, there are more than 20,000 companies posting for only 1 to 5 days. And in a system where there's no legal minimum wage, but you have to go out there as a trade unionist and give a collective agreement, that's very hard if they're only here for 2 to 3 days. And of course there are some big ones, this is my ugly drawing, there are some big ones and they're covered, but there's a huge amount of postings that cannot be covered by these efforts. Nonetheless, there was a calculation of late that said that 44% of the work done by posted workers was in fact covered by collective agreement in the Danish construction industry. And I just want to point out that this has not happened by sheer incident, somebody stumbling onto a collective agreement. It's happened due to the fact that Danish trade unions have taken upon themselves a very serious task of really going out there. They said, we don't need a minimum wage, we don't need an extension mechanism, we will solve this ourselves. They put enormous fund into regulating this issue. And as you see, some of the numbers we have from their own databases is that they've been out more than 5,000 times to these less than 5,000 companies. And really they've made a huge number of conflicts, they've made a huge number of adoption agreements, and they have new tools, these 48-hour meetings where the burden of proof is reversed, in a sense that companies have to prove that they are not violating the collective agreement. So there's a huge effort to try and make this function, make posting and the inflow of workers more generally a positive thing, to embrace them and welcome them, but on Danish terms. So those were the words.
Put on the next presentation. Just Jens, if you stay just a minute, because I was just hoping that somebody would hold up their mobile phone camera and take a picture of this rainfall of new regulations that you have introduced in Denmark lately, because I found it very inspiring indeed, this mix that you have made between introducing new regulations but also providing funds to the authorities that are to make this very crucial enforcement then of the new regulations. In your mind, what is the next step? What are the regulations that are now debated? Can you single out someone that we will see in the coming months or years? Is it the issue of posted workers that will be addressed, do you think?
That is a topic, but I have to say that this is also a back and forth issue, in the sense that right now the national budget has prioritized this enforcement effort once more, but at the same time some of the regulation that has been introduced are being contested. Germany and Poland had complained that some of these are restriction to the free movement of services. So it might also be, I mean, some of the reforms that were mentioned here was due to Laval. I mean, thank you very much, Sweden. We got that from you. So I mean, it's a back and forth process. Things are also sort of going the other way, where you are liberalizing and loosening stuff. So I'm not certain that I want to predict in which direction it is going. And it will very much depend, I think, on the upcoming election, because politics really matter here. This government we have now has really prioritized it, made it a key marker. The government we potentially will have, I think, not so much.
Good to know we have some politicians here to listen.